All right, hello. We are back. We are back on. This is Founders Live, and we are talking with Glenn Torson from London. How you doing, Glenn?
I'm doing well, Nick. Thanks very much. How you doing?
Absolutely. We're here. This is the Founders ROC. This is a weekly series that we really jump into foundational issues and principles of being a founder, being an entrepreneur. Today we are talking about leadership and our leadership style. So, Glenn, I will throw it to you. When you hear the words leadership and leadership style, I mean, what initially comes to mind when you're thinking about that?
Well, leadership and leadership style, they can they can be quite different, despite the fact that obviously they're very linked. So leadership in itself is, you'd like to think it's straightforward, but it's really about making sure that you're providing almost an outlet for the people that are there as your team. So it's sometimes it's as straightforward as just taking hits for people that shouldn't be taking them underneath you or in your team or whatever it may be, and just showing that you're going to be able to go in front and really to provide a motivational sort of front figure for the people that are following you, that are part of your team. And the style itself is, I guess, from my perspective anyway, and this is again, it can be very different from industry to industry, or depending on your role or what type of leader it is you actually need to be. But the style itself is how you get that out there. So whether you're trying to do it sort of behind the scenes, or if you want to be very vocal, or if you want to do it as a almost as a someone running alongside a team, that there are lots of different styles to get a leadership figure in front of you. So it's a really interesting area to explore.
Right. And so I read a while ago. This was, trying to even remember who it was, but leadership is influence, and that's really it. It's influence, and you can have a positive influence on an individual or team. You can have a negative influence on a team. And how do you come alongside founders to look at and identify their influence, and then if there needs to be improvement, what steps are taken, from that direction. But I guess first and foremost, um, do you how do you notice influence from a leadership, standpoint?
I think from a founding perspective, especially with small young companies that are growing and all of that, the leadership element is very much in the example that you set. It's you're setting a style, you're setting a tone, you're displaying a model of engagement that you want people to follow, you want people to embody, and it's very aligned to the individual. That is that sort of. In order to grow the company, you're going to get challenges in the sense that you're going to have lots of different leaders that are going to either try to force themselves forward because they want to grow their own career and they want to develop their own attributes. But from a founder perspective, it really is it's you, it's day one, it's that embodiment that you're able to put out there, and you really show that by what you stand for and what you do.
Yeah, and is there examples that you can point to, from that you've noticed, either companies or specifically, leaders, CEOs, exemplifying high quality leadership and influence on, teams, whether they're large or small?
I think a great one from my own perspective is to look at someone like Elon Musk, for example, at Tesla. And that's because obviously Tesla's not the only thing he's ever done, but it's his principle. Whenever he something, if he doesn't have the time or if he doesn't have the resources or the right company to move it forward, he makes it publicly available because he doesn't want to be the bottleneck of something great for the rest of the world. And that's a different type of leadership, because it's obviously not him sitting there in front of the team and saying, this is how we're going to run our sales machine, or this is how I want. But he's leading the company ethic. He's showing, this is what we stand for, and that's in my opinion of leadership, because it's really just showing everybody you don't have to be afraid. If you're in one of my companies, you never have to be afraid of doing what's right, because that's what he's doing every single time he's out there publicly making any sort of statements, which is a fantastic thing to see. I mean, if you're one of the people that are somehow employed under the Elon Musk umbrella, that's a great thing to have in front of you, and know that that's something that's going to be rewarded and supported within.
Yeah, you're absolutely right on that. Just looking at when you look at I think it is easy to grab, Musk from either Tesla or SpaceX. He's such a icon at this point, but he does show such a strong leadership. And what you're pointing at is it's not just that he's quote the CEO and the founder, that he is not afraid. He's literally not afraid of saying anything. And when a rocket explodes, he comes out and says, like, shit happened. And he is not afraid. He doesn't hide. He tweets a lot. He makes public statements. He's on stage a lot. And I think he just has enough courage, man. Like, he doesn't have the fear. He has courage to say what he needs to say, and he has courage to, he knows that people aren't necessarily going to agree with him 100%. And I noticed that that's also a great leadership quality, is really, balancing the line between saying whatever you want and then being respectful, but at the same time not being afraid to just like make people mad. If you're doing the right thing for the organization. So what a question to you would be, um, how do leaders then toe that line of being leaders that aren't afraid, but also leaders that care for the people that they are leading?
Yeah, that's a big challenge that a lot of people in leadership positions struggle with. And I think that's why there's such a strong pull, especially now, for things like coaching and mentoring programs as well, because it's people are trying to pull from these experiences. And at the end of the day, I read something not too long ago, which was a great statement to sort of go by sometimes. And everyone's always looking for experience. Well, experience comes from making mistakes. So whenever you're looking at someone and thinking, this guy's got so much leadership experience, well, it's probably because he's failed a bunch of times and he's learned that that's not the way to do it correctly. And that's, at the end of the day, that's what makes a great leader. It's someone who's willing to take those risks, and when they make the mistakes, they obviously acknowledge the mistakes, but they're able to learn from them and actually come forward from it as well. And that's a really, really big aspect. And I think it's a strong quality for people to be able to see in their leaders as well. It's definitely something teams tend to identify with more than, say, someone that's just infallible and you can't reach them, because then you almost start to be afraid to ask them for help or ask them for their opinion or anything else. So yeah, from my perspective, to be able to show that aspect of, yes, you make mistakes, but a good leader learns from them and then lets everyone underneath them or behind them, part of their team, lets them learn from their mistake. That's a really strong leader. That's someone who can bring teams forward as well.
Yeah, and do you think there is strength in being maybe weak, or not? What am I trying to say? There's Being a strong leader means that you also show your human side, right? And so how would leaders start walking this path when it seems like initially you feel like you need to be guarded, you need to be strong, you need to be like, no, but at the same time, like Elon Musk is at least somewhat, he shows his human side, and that's okay. So, you know, it's a difficult process.
Yeah, I think something from my own sort of experiences and perspective as well is when you've got these sessions where you're hearing a leader that's speaking and telling you all these things, a lot of the really good sessions that you remember and that actually sort of stick with you and you take something from yourself, they always start with a story of learning. They've made a mistake somehow, or they misjudged a situation, something in that respect. And how did that help them get to the point where people now see them as a leader? To be able to see that and make that connection as well, that's one of those aspects that really gets you to put some faith in this person. And at the end of the day, from my own perspective, that's what made me to a large extent see this person as a leader. So it's, again, being able to see that human element and the fact that you're learning from the mistakes. I think that is absolutely one of the biggest qualities of a really successful leader, because you're able to actually give other people a shortcut. They can learn from all the mistakes that you've made just by listening to you as a leader. That's something that people really identify with, and that's what builds that trust.
Right. And going into styles, like leadership styles, like are there any styles that jump out at you that you would suggest, or the ones that you would maybe suggest not to entertain?
Well, I think the obvious styles. I mean, you've got sort of the two ends of the spectrum. You've got the very outspoken, sort of all singing and dancing leaders, where it almost becomes more of a soapbox kind of roadshow, kind of like, for lack of a better comparison, a presidential election in the US, where it's just constantly look at me and this is what I've done. And they actually, I don't know, I think to some extent that type of leader, you lose touch with what it is to actually be a leader, because everything becomes more about just looking at you and not what you can do for the team or the group that you're actually supposed to be figureheading or actually leading on to better things. So I mean that you have to be outspoken. You have to be able to make a connection between the team, but there's a line where that ceases to be a value and almost becomes more of a detriment, because people start to almost disengage. They don't want to try and burst that bubble or sort of get too close. And then you've got the other end of the spectrum, obviously, which is so you want to be the more hands on the shoulder, sort of caring, almost advisor type leader. But again, there's a danger in pulling away too much and just not having an actual connection. I mean, I've been in environments before where you've almost felt as if the boss or the leader has been either not on location, or he's just so withdrawn that to go and interrupt is a burden. And then again, that's not a leader. That's a boss. And a boss and a leader are two very different things.
Yeah, you did. I mean, you nailed it on the head, man. In terms of what's happening over here, when you look at, our presidential election, which by the way should be over fairly soon, and we're hoping for
Exciting
the
to see.
best. But yeah, you're right. There is a spectrum, and it really is. When you look at that spectrum, way far on the right, or where you were suggesting, is it really is unfortunate, because it turns into all about me and not about we, and even just I think as a leader, the leader understanding that you have, because you are a leader by default, there's a group that's following you, and your success as a leader is like is growing them or benefiting the group. And what tends to happen sometimes is, if that leader's misled, it's now about them and not about the people, and that's a problem. And then when you're describing the other side, yeah, you basically are flipping it to where the person is probably micromanaging, and not necessarily providing a strong example, and that could be a problem too. So it's interesting that you painted that wide spectrum and used some examples that we can all identify with. But yeah, I think what I've noticed is um, it's hard to be on. It's hard to find the balance of both, because I think human nature pulls one person one way or the other. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, coming back to the whole point on the leadership style itself, anyway, the best leaders have a style which is inherently their personality, because that's how you can strengthen. It's a leadership style which isn't put on. It's not an act. It's not something that they embody just for the hours of 9 to 5 or whenever it is they need to be a leader. But it's something which sits within their personality anyway. And that's why they're such great leaders, because they're authentic. People identify with them, when they're out there and they're doing their thing. It's a human quality anyway. You naturally believe and trust more in someone that you can feel is not just putting on a facade, but it's something that's genuine the entire way through.
And what would you say to someone that realizes that they might not have the exact desired qualities of, the charismatic, the strong leader that's out there, but also shows a human side? Maybe they're not as extroverted as others. Is there things that they can do, or practices they can put in place that help them maybe develop some of those leadership qualities that they desire?
Absolutely. I mean, there are a lot of ways that you can either both by self coaching or self mentoring, but also with an actual mentor or a coach, you can highlight qualities. You can. And this comes back to something else that we focus a lot on as well. It's called state management, which is all part of NLP as well, the neuro linguistic programming. And that's more about identifying within yourself, what are the key qualities that you're looking to enhance or highlight. What is it that's going to bring value to your situation? What's going to help drive you forward? And there are absolutely techniques that you can work on, that you can develop, that you can specialize in, that will help you in those scenarios. But at the end of the day, it's not a matter of becoming what you perceive to be a right leader under certain qualities. I honestly think it's a matter of just picking those elements within yourself that, as I said, the ones that are true, that are authentic, because an audience will identify with that element before they identify with anything else. I mean, you can go out there and jump and dance and sing and prance around, and yeah, you might excite an audience, but the question then becomes, if you've excited that audience, what next? Are they going to actually listen to what you've got to say as a leader, or have you just excited them for 20 minutes because you're running around and dancing, and then once you stop, then you've got nothing else to say? And that's where the connection that's forced through authenticity and the actual honest nature of yourself, that's a much stronger connection than anything else, and that's what forges a bond between a team and a leader.
Right. And I mean, you just said a huge point, which is it's the follow through, it's the consistency. What do you see with like smaller teams? Let's focus maybe more in on a startup, 5, 10, 20 person company. That leader, that CEO, typically, what do they need to do consistently to enhance their leadership and really have buy-in from their team?
I think the nature of that type of company, it's everything is so agile from one company to another. It's tough to really say, I think, these are the three core qualities for every team of that size, because it's going to be very much defined by the story of the company itself. I mean, typically, when you're that type of organization, a small founding team or just a small group, you've come together because you've got a real belief in the product that you've put together, or the platform that you've built, or something in that respect. And the leadership there is obviously, a lot of it lies in that mutual support. You're probably working crazy hours, anytime, any place. And a lot of it sits within just being there and taking the same hits together. So that in itself is a big piece. When you hear those stories from the small companies, it really is just you're all going through the same. And to be the leader in that respect, as the CEO, the founder, you've got to be the one that keeps pushing that story forward and that's staying true to the original passion that brought everyone together. So I think it's a matter of making sure that you can continue that momentum and that you're supporting all of your team in that respect, because it's a very tough time. And obviously, if you've got the team, I think based on what we've discussed before, you've actually already sort of tackled one of the big tough elements of being a startup or a founder. That lonely aspect.
Yeah.
It's nothing worse than trying to build a company by yourself, because you've got no one to help drive you forward when things get rough.
Totally. You're right. And, it's what I've noticed with not only the things that I have done, but, I'm here in Seattle and, I'm around founders every day. And the ones that are growing and being like the teams are growing and their businesses are becoming successful, I've noticed those leaders are just absolutely as authentic as they can be. They're like they they open themselves up and allow for connection with their team, human connection. They individually they do their one-on-ones, but it's not necessarily like a structured one-on-one. They might go grab a drink, they might go to lunch. They talk every day. They're like the leaders are not absent from unless they're in a different city for business. Like they actually are, on the road talking to investors or whatnot. But outside of those requirements, they are in the office, they are spending time with the team, and they basically come along and say, I am a part of you and a part of this team. I'm not more special than you. And it's just those type of things that seem to garner a lot of, it's just ultimate respect from the people that are following them. And that is what I've noticed is so paramount. And it doesn't matter if you're a small team, it doesn't, and you're an emerging leader as a CEO, or if you're like, you've raised a ton of money and you're $1 billion valuation, you just show up every day and you're one of them. And that is, I think, what's required.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it it's interesting though that success, whether it's financial or others, can influence or affect someone's leadership. Have you noticed that as a team or like a startup or a company becomes more successful, the leadership of that individual could possibly get tainted?
Yeah, I think that that's a very real risk. I mean, especially as you start to get those serious funding rounds and you start to layer in, you know, the executive team or even sort of the management tiers. I think that's definitely a tricky aspect because you're starting to build in these layers between yourself and the team. And that's, I think, just when you're looking at some of these companies, that's where a lot of the time that there's actually a lot of challenges that surface. You know, companies get to that point, they get the first real big sort of round of funding, and everyone starts to think, yes, we've made it. You know, it's a success, but that's probably where the biggest challenges start to come up because you lose touch with reality, you lose contact with your team, you start to lose that genuine feedback that you're getting from being such a close knit unit. Maybe you make a few wrong hires, or you just build in a layer that doesn't match with the team that they have to manage. You know, you get new leaders in place, and all of a sudden you've got barriers between all the aspects that made it a success in the first place. I mean, and it comes down to just again the fundamental principles of what you're looking to do. If you lose touch with the business as a founder, then you've either got to accept, you know, I've done my job as a founder, the company's a success, and you've got to step away entirely and let a new structure take over. Or you've got to really make sure you're staying true to what you did on day one. You can't do it sort of halfway. It's not going to work because you're going to have friction points and you're going to get challenges in between, and that's where things start to fall apart.
And what resources would you suggest, whether someone's at that point or even just wants to improve, maintain and improve their leadership? Is what resources? I mean, you mentioned coaches and whatnot. What sort of directions would you suggest people go to improve their, or really tighten up their leadership?
I mean, from a leadership perspective, the best thing that you can do, really, and that is find a mentor that you believe in, whether that's someone that you've worked with yourself at an early stage in your career, someone that's been a big influence on you from a business perspective. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that someone can be a mentor, but really from a leadership perspective, like coaching is great for a lot of things in business in general, but I would say, you know, going out there and finding a certified or a well-qualified coach is more for business principles. Whereas for leadership itself, yes, there are some coaches that are great leaders, but I would look to my personal strengths and say, right, who's the right mentor for me? Because that's what's going to amplify my qualities as a leader. And everyone's got different strengths that make them a good leader, and the only way that you're really going to push that forward is by a mentor that can help release that part of you. And that could be a family member, it could be a close friend, it could even be, I know people that have gone as far back as to find an early teacher from college or something like that as well. And it's not always, you know, weekly structured sessions. It can just be the fact that you're able to give someone a call when you've got challenges or scenarios that you want to run through. And that's definitely from my experience and the people I've discussed this with. It's where people see the biggest success.
Right, and you're saying that above and beyond, reading either books or blogs, you'd say like it's way more effective to work with someone, person to person.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there are obviously lots of blogs and readerships on leadership, you know, things that you can go out there and read. But at the end of the day, leadership is a human quality. You're trying to lead people. The best way to pick up on the nuances of that is to speak with someone that can take you through those scenarios and that can actually help you find those triggers in yourself that make you a good leader. It's at the end of the day, the stuff you're going to go out and read as well has been written by a person, so it makes more sense to go to the person than try to read it off the page.
Right. And you're absolutely right on that. But speaking of, resources and reading, what is there one or two things like resources that you would suggest people can search out, and whether it's a blog or a book, anything in that direction that you would suggest?
I would always recommend, I mean, I wouldn't recommend anything sort of generic because it's going to be different from person to person. But if you look at different sort of influencer communities, try to find, you know, thought leaders, influencers that align with what you identify with personally, and then look for their blogs, look for things that they're involved with, and try to read up on those. Because at the end of the day, going out there and finding someone on Twitter or someone that's pushed something on LinkedIn and said, hey, here are the 10 top leadership hacks or whatever it is, it's a lot of bullshit, for lack of a better term, because it may work for me, it may not work for you. So to be able to find things that are going to help you as a leader, you have to first identify what kind of leader do you want to be and what kind of leader is going to help you. And that's when you can start to zero in on material that's going to actually help you and drive your thoughts forward.
Yeah, you just said something really interesting, which is it doesn't, these specific things don't work for everyone, and everyone's different, and they have their own style, they have their own personality, and basically finding who and what you connect with the most authentically, what your personality and style is, matching that with an individual, and then basically tailoring these sort of things to your style. I think that's awesome. Comparative to the other side, which is, yeah, here's the 10, here's 5 or 10 leadership things, and this is like set in stone. And that's not the way it is. And I think when people, as leaders, your step one is to determine what your your strengths are, what is your personality style. Secondly, then you'll start to understand what sort of aspects of leadership do you want to dial into and tighten up, and then who is aligned with you, who's a similar type of person that you can look to and maybe even talk to help you develop your leadership style. And it's not just here's 10 things and you got to do those, and if you don't, then you're not a strong leader. That's just not the way it works.
No, absolutely. I mean, for example, one which I've sort of discussed with a few people quite recently as well. If you were to take, 2 people, which I don't think really anyone would disagree are great leaders. On the one hand, you've got Steve Jobs at Apple, and on the other hand, you've got Richard Branson at Virgin. Fantastic leaders. They've built phenomenal organizations underneath themselves, and they've got a lot of great initiatives that are born out of what they've done, and they've taken some incredible challenges, seen opportunities. But if you were to take a lot of the principles that Richard Branson sort of leads himself on, the openness, the creativity, and all these aspects, and put that in a blog and send it to Steve Jobs, he would probably take one look at it and say, this is a lot of crap, because he was very well known for being incredibly strict and having a lot of control inside his environment. And that's an entirely different style of leadership. But when you take a step back and look at both of them in isolation, incredibly successful. And if you spin things the other way around and take a lot of the core aspects of what Steve Jobs maybe prided himself on and send those across to Richard, he may not have been as vocal as to say this is a load of crap, because he's very nice and calm and structured and well spoken, but he would probably internally sit and think, this is not what I want to do, this isn't what I want to stand for. So it's a very clear opportunity to see, leadership is never set in stone. It's a matter of how you want to take things forward and the message that you want to stand for, because you can be successful if you're true to yourself.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, one of the biggest things to recognize with that side of things, leadership, because once you're doing something which is obvious that you're not 100% in it, people won't follow you. They just won't do it, because if you don't believe in yourself, why should anyone else?
Absolutely. And hey, with that, Glenn, we are out of time. Really appreciate your thoughts today on leadership. Incredible. And I really think that just the lesson here is just figure your personal style out first, then seek out individuals that possibly align with that, and you will start to improve your leadership. And with that, we are closing up for this latest Founders ROC, and catch you on Founders Live. Glenn Thorson, really appreciate it. And just to let you know, I am actually out next week, so we will not be having the Founders ROC conversation next week, but in mid-November we'll be back.
Awesome. Well, thanks very much, Nick, and look forward to next time.
Great. Thanks, Glenn. See you later.
Take it easy. See you.